And once you are in place, I invite you to find a sense of grounding, whichever position you have chosen, whether on your back or in a seat or a reclined position. Invite yourself to feel the connection to the earth. To feel your body rooting itself to the surface of this amazing planet. To this surface that we all share in this moment, regardless of where we are. Perhaps invite yourself to feel that deep connection, that physical connection you have in every moment to this planet and everything and everyone on this planet. We sometimes forget about our shared physicality. I invite you to remember it in this moment. To remember it with every fiber of your physical being as you root and ground to the earth. And as you begin to notice the breath, the life force, the prana that is flowing through you right here, right now. The breath, too, is an amazing reminder that we share this connection. Not just the connection of shared physicality, but the connection of shared energy, of life force pulsing through all of us. I invite you to connect yourself to that community, that communal experience of vitality, a vitality that is beyond your own personal vitality, but a collective energy. And to ponder perhaps how your tiny universe of vitality within you connects to the greater universe of vitality. How your energy reverberates into everyone's energy. I invite you to be very aware of this shared physicality, this shared vitality, as you ponder and notice the mind state you're bringing with you, the thoughts, the emotions, the attitudes, the beliefs. And as you ponder how even these seemingly very individualistic thoughts and emotions exist within the collective. Our emotions, our thoughts, our attitudes, our beliefs, they develop, they arise out of our shared cultures and our diverse cultures. Whatever you believe is a reflection of the beliefs that are likely prominent in your communities. And so begin to notice your thoughts, even the thoughts that you have as a sign, a signal, a trace of this collectivism, of this connection, this interdependence that you have with everything around you. Your physicality, your vitality, your mind, your heart. None of this belongs just to you. It arises from and reverberates into the communities that you share. And therein lies tremendous opportunity as well as tremendous responsibility. With those ponderings in your heart, I invite you to draw your attention to your mind's eye, that space between and just above the eyebrows. As you invite an intention for your time in class today. Whatever arises, even if it's completely nonverbal or transverbal, or even if it's a sense of not knowing what it is, just hold that loosely. And if there is something that seems worthwhile, you might choose to seal it into your heart as you draw a breath in. A breath that comes from the collective. And then to share that intention outward as you release a breath out. A breath that returns to the collective. And continue to breathe in this manner of knowing that when you take a breath in, you are taking in shared life force. You're taking in air that may have been breathed by many other beings. And when you breathe out, you share your own life force, your own vitality outward, returning it in essence to the collective. Becoming aware of the breath as a constant give and take. A give and take of the things that sustain your body. A give and take that supports or hinders your vitality. A give and take that promotes or gets in the way of certain mind states. A give and take that shapes attitudes, beliefs, and creates in a way emotions. Each breath is a profound reminder of this deep connection that we have with one another. And so I invite you in this moment to let this breath be natural, gentle, soft, quiet. I invite you to find a breath that isn't greedy, that doesn't take more than you need. A breath that is discerning, so that you don't release out more than you have to give. Breathing in line with your needs. Breathing in line with your ethics. Breathing in line with your own way of creating a purposeful and disciplined lifestyle. And as you allow this natural rhythm of breath to unfold, I invite you to keep the breath nasal, to enjoy the many benefits of nasal breathing, the cleansing, the warming, the filtering, and so much more. Breathing in and out through the nose in a gentle, quiet, and silent rhythm. A rhythm that's coherent across all of your layers. Breath reflecting the resting shape of the body, breath reflecting the calming of the mind. As you continue in this soft and gentle way, begin to notice if your breath has a particular texture this morning. Maybe it's a bit hesitant or ragged. Maybe there are little hitches or glitches, little disturbances. Or maybe the flow is smooth, almost weightless, light, peaceful. Notice the texture without any judgment, with an openness of heart and openness of mind. And perhaps with a flash of insight that the texture of the breath may be communicating with you on some subtle level. Not straining to notice what that is, but just being open to the fact that the breath is feedback. And notice if there is any sound to the breath. There may be a bit of a wheezy sound, or a huffy or a hoarse sound. Is this a sound that you're creating deliberately for some reason, or is this a sound that's just simply part of your breathing in this moment? Or perhaps the breath is silent. Silent in the sense that there is not any noise or sound associated with the breath. Silent maybe to the degree that you even can't hear your own breath moving. And perhaps this silence is linked to a quietude, a gentleness of movement in the breath. Movement so gentle that you can hardly discern it. And is this texture somehow also notable, and this sound in your body, in your mind? Or sound and texture slowly evolving or changing over time, even though you have no intention of creating change. Stay open to the possibility that just by being observed, the texture may become smoother. Sound may disappear. Breath and body and mind may become quiet, gentle, soft, rhythmic, coherent. And then perhaps you begin to notice how quickly or slowly you're breathing in this moment. Could be a very subjective sort of just felt sense of, oh, my breath feels kind of fast, or oh, my breath feels very slow. Just get a sense of the speed, the rate of breath. If you look at the research, the average number of breaths that's reported for human beings is 12 to 14. But some breathe as many breaths as 20 or 24, even more. even in a resting state. And yet the evolving research is showing us that the optimal rate of breathing is somewhere between 5.5 to 8 breaths per minute. And so get just a subjective, a felt sense of the rate of your breathing. And if you would like to get more than just a subjective sense of the rate of your breathing, in just a moment, I will tell you when a minute starts. And if you would like to count during that minute to see how many breaths you are breathing, you're welcome to try that. If you don't want to, you don't have to. If you do decide to count, and whenever I say start, just note whether you're in the middle of an inhalation and exhalation. And then just count how many inhalations, if you were on an inhalation, or how many exhalations, if you were on an exhalation, you take during that minute. And so continue to breathe naturally. And then start counting if you wish. Five seconds. And stop. And continue to breathe naturally. And if you count it, make note of your count, not trying to interpret it, but just letting it sink into your memory banks for later reference. As you continue to breathe patiently, compassionately, nasally, softly, gently. And as you maybe begin to become aware of the phases of the breath, moving beyond the inhalation and the exhalation to note if there is even the tiniest of gaps, either at the top of the breath, that pause between the end of the inhalation before the exhalation begins, or at the bottom of the breath, that moment when the exhalation has departed completely and the inhalation has not begun. Maybe that gap is hardly even discernible for you. Or maybe that gap is relatively notable. You're not trying to change it in this moment. You are simply curious. Just like the texture and the sound may be related to body and mind, so are the phases of the breath. So notice what is present for you beyond the inhalation and exhalation. compassionate and equanimous about whatever it is that you find out. And then whether you're seated or lying on the ground, I invite you to, to link your breath with a bit of gentle movement. It's our usual sun breath, and it works just fine on the floor as long as you have room to slide your arms up and around and overhead. So if there's furniture in the way, you may have to wiggle yourself down just a little bit so you don't hit your hand. Yeah. And once you're in a position where you know your arms can travel around you freely, you can start with your sun breath rhythm, where the arms travel upward with the inhalation. Maybe they pause with the gap at the top. They travel downward with the exhalation. And maybe they pause at the bottom. If it feels secure in your environment and with regard to your balance, if you're seated or lying down, it might be nice to take this movement with the eyes closed, to not be distracted by what you might see on the screen. So that you can let yourself be moved by your own breath rhythm. And so that you can observe how your mind perceives that rhythm. Whether your mind is pushing for something faster or slower. And then notice who wins. The genuine expression of your vitality, the desire or attachment of the mind, the need of the body. Just notice as you move arms up and down patiently from the inside out, as if you had never ever done a sun breath in your life. Curious about the stance of breath and movement. Continuing to breathe naturally, gently, smoothly, and quietly if that's possible, nasal if that's accessible. Continue this movement as you gently begin to deliberately press the tongue to the top of the palate, the roof of the mouth. Maybe with the tip of the tongue resting gently at the back of your upper front teeth. Letting the tongue rest there in this upward position as you continue to move from the inside out. And if you and your nervous system can handle one more thing, I invite you to begin on your exhalations to make the sound of a B, continuing to press that tongue to the hard palate, the backs of the upper teeth, as you maybe sound the letter M with the mouth closed, breathing through the nose on the exhalation. Perhaps noticing the vibration of the sound. Perhaps noticing its reverberations into your physicality, into your mind and your heart. As you make the sound of a bumblebee with the exhalation. If you can, stay with it. If it's too uncomfortable, of course, you can always change to something that works better for you. If you are still sounding your bumblebee breath and moving your arms, and you'd like to stop the arm movement, you can unlink. And the arms can rest while the breath continues to sound outward, that sound of M on the exhale. Finish the round that you're on and then take one more, maybe even two if you prefer. And at the end of your preferred number of cycles, let the arms rest. Let go of the sound. And bring your full attention to the breath. To notice any shifts that may have happened in those 4 breath phases. Not expecting anything, but being open to noticing if something did shift. And if you are still lying on the ground, at this point, I invite you to make a gentle transition to a seat for some seated movement with breathing. And while some of you are making that transition, let me talk for a moment about the seat that I'm encouraging you to take. So even if you're seated already, I'm inviting you to find a hero's pose. In hero's pose, there's a bit of internal rotation that comes into the thighs. The lower legs move slightly outward, so there's a bit of an angle outward. And little kids, love this shape and they just pop right down into it. And maybe some of you are able to do that. I can certainly do it, but it's not the most healthful alignment for my spine if I just sit on the floor here. I can be here for a while, but what's most auspicious for most people is to actually bring something between the feet. And a yoga block just happens to be that perfect something. So if you have one, that also gives you permission to squeeze the feet against the block, bringing a little bit of adduction into the legs, and then to place your bum on the block. And notice, if you can see yourself from the side, if you have that auspicious vector of direction, that angle in the sacrum that allows the natural unfolding of your spine. If the block is a bit too hard, you have your towel, you can pad the block. And that also lifts you a little higher if you feel like you need more lift to find that natural angle of the spine. Hero's pose is a great place to begin to notice that a seat can become more restful with a tiny bit of internal rotation in the thigh. And so you could use your own hands here to internally rotate the thigh. So drawing the outer edge up, the inner edge in, outer edge up, inner edge in. to create sort of a rotational movement of the legs inward. And you may find just a little bit more ease in the seat. You may not, we're all different, but it's worth exploring. You may have already been very internally rotated just from the way you came into the pose, and nothing else is necessary. If you notice that your feet are not happy when they're flat against the ground, now you need your washcloths. So you can fold them up, or you can take a pair of socks and ball them up, and you put that right there at the point of where you might dorsiflex your ankle, and place it under you. And that gives enough support for most people that they can actually have their legs tucked now with enough lift under the front of the ankle. For those of you who can be flat on the ground, you're absolutely welcome to be flat on the ground, but this is a great trick. For those of you with knee issues, and this I'll show from the side, you can either use your hand towel or you can use the small washcloths. I'll show it with the cloths. You can come forward and put the washcloth as far into the knee as you can get it. So you really have to lean forward. You have to extend the joint a tiny bit, and then you kind of want to hold these washcloths in the crease of the knee as you sit back, and you may feel a nice opening in the knee that's very therapeutic. And even if you don't have knee issues, if you've never done this before, you may want to experience this in your body. Just try it out and see. If you don't like it, you can take it out. But for a lot of people, this actually makes Hero's pose a very accessible seat, and one of the great seats that I like to use for pranayama and for preparations for pranayama, because it is more sustainable than, say, a cross-legged seat where the leg bones are externally rotated and abducted. Here, we're naturally internally rotated and adducted, which tends to allow more of the weight to distribute itself, not just onto the sits bones, but the tops of the femurs, the tops of the thighs. And that's a healthful way of sitting, right? Is to distribute the weight, and it supports that natural angle of your sacrum. If you're hyperlordotic in your lumbar spine, you may need to experiment with this a little bit to find the right spot, right? Because you don't want to make a hyperlordosis more hyper. So for those of you with that, you might want to deliberately bring a little bit more of your weight into the sits bones. But for a lot of people, they actually need to shift the weight slightly ahead, forward of the sits bones. So notice what's right for you. And then choose that those props and that hero's pose that works for you, as we will continue to move a little bit with breath. So I'm going to just mix a bunch of didactics in with the practice. So it'll be nice and long today. All right, so from here, I invite you to once again use the breath to inhale the arms up. This time we'll actually keep the arms at top. And, I just had this spontaneous wiggle in my body. If you need a spontaneous wiggle, always feel free, right? There's like no need not to be stiff about this. And then begin some arm circles when you're ready. And you can see the arm circles I'm proposing, but you can do your own thing, are with the elbows in a cactus position, so with the elbows a bit flexed. Just shifts how you might circle the shoulders. It's not so habitual as circling with the arms extended or the elbows extended, and hence this invitation. And once you've done this, going forward and back, always in the direction of opening the heart, see what happens if you actually bring the hands to the shoulders to make like little tea kettle arms as you circle here. And notice the ranges of motion that you can play with here. This this is a mobilization of the entire shoulder, of all shoulder joints, and the junction between the scapulae and the rib basket. This is a really, really great prep for pranayama. It invites resilience into the rib basket. It invites the scapula to move freely on the back of the body. It brings openness into the front of the body. And then for you, you might want to notice how adding this movement that's a bit more unusual, maybe a bit more vigorous, how it's affecting your breathing. And can you still breathe nasally here? And then you might let that movement just wiggle itself out as you rest for a moment. And feel the reverberations of the movement in your physical being, in your vital being, as reflected perhaps by the breath, and also in your mind, where there may be a story unfolding, or maybe there's some emotions that got stirred up or calmed down, simply by moving and breathing and attending. And you can stay here, continuing to observe all of your layers, their interconnections, their interdependence. Or you can go ahead and bring your arms up. Exhale them into cactus. And then move with the breath from here to bring some flexion and extension into the spine. Pressing the arms back into an imaginary wall with the inhalation, letting the front body open, and maybe pressing the arms forward into an imaginary wall or into each other as you round and flex through the spine, exhaling. Find your 4-part breathing here, your natural breath rhythm that is attentive to all phases of the breath. Maybe close your eyes and move from the inside out, guided by your breathing. Noticing any changes in breath rate. Maybe in the texture of the breath. Maybe in the sounds of the breath. And attend to what is driving the speed of movement here. Is it a desire for quick movement that's overriding the rate of your natural breath? So is your mind in charge, or is your breath in charge, your vitality, your authentic need for energy and for release? It's a multi-way relationship between breath and body and mind and emotions and community, what we see on the screen. And so let yourself notice what's in the driver's seat here. And whether whatever is in the driver's seat is reflective of what you genuinely need, maybe as you tune into the present guna or polyvagal state. Or if what is in the driver's seat here is forced by habit, by desire, by attachment. And yes, we're doing this for a long time, but this is as much a concentration practice as it is a pranayama practice. Finish the round that you're on, and then take either one or two more, yogi's choice. Knowing that whenever you have exhaled, you can lift up to a natural position, release your hands to your lap or your thighs or your sides to come back to your breath, curious about the 4 phases of the breath. Curious about its texture and sounds. Curious about the rate of breath. But perhaps also curious about the vitality that is pulsing, vibrating through your body and your mind. Noticing perhaps subtle shifts in your physical being. Maybe in temperature. Maybe in comfort or ease. Subtle changes in the mind. Shifts in patience, maybe. You can stay here reflective and aware, or you can come with me into a new seat for this next movement. In this seat now, we will experiment with a cross-legged seat. So this is a tougher way for people to sit, because in a cross-legged seat, as we talked about Friday, there is a starting point of external rotation in the hip joint and abduction. And so your bony structure of your acetabulum, the neck of your femur, the size of the head of your femur, the anteversion of the all of those things now make a difference as to what's possible in terms of leg placement that still supports the natural spine, right? And so if you land in a cross-legged seat like this, then you realize, oh, the angle of my sacrum is no longer auspicious. And so it may be helpful for you to experiment yet again with your hand towel, bringing that towel under your seat. And then sliding forward to the point where you notice, okay, my angle is back. And often it doesn't take but a ½ inch to an inch. A wedge is great as well if you have a wedge, but sometimes it takes a lot. Sometimes it takes a folded blanket for that angle to become auspicious so that the spine can rise up naturally. If you're hyperlordotic, you probably won't need any of these props, but you never know. You should never assume, right? If one blanket is not enough, take a second blanket. Keep exploring until you find, there it is. There's the natural spine. And then notice where the knees are in relation to the ASIS, the anterior superior iliac spine, that top part, that bone that you can palpate at the top of the hip, usually an inch or two below the lowest rib. And if the knees are floating, but your spine is natural, then take something to prop the knees, because you really don't want to overstretch your groin. And again, your wash towel, your hand towel, your washcloth may be perfect. Maybe you need something. I tend to put it closer to the the top of the leg as opposed to directly under the knee. But you experiment and see what gives you enough support. If that's not enough, maybe you need a doubled up blanket. Or you teach somebody to use a doubled up blanket, right? That's not super visible here in the purple, but the white is a little more visible. So the blanket, you can kind of stuff it under there until you see, here the spine is natural, the knees are supported, the person is stable and comfortable. For me, this wedging doesn't work at all because it actually puts me into spinal flexion. But for somebody who's hyperlordotic, maybe that's a good thing, right? So you just never know what works for a person. That's why we experiment. But the idea is that you don't want the knees to float without a support, especially when you're seated for something like pranayama or for meditation or concentration. Some people prefer to have a block under the knees. If you do that, I suggest that you angle the block like so that you don't have the edge of the block cutting into the side of the leg. I don't know if you can see that well enough. Ooh, maybe if I put something of a different color under here to create more contrast. So I have the block lifted up here. I don't know if you can see that. And it's on its side like this. That was a nice sigh from somebody. So that's another really nice way of supporting the knees. And again, keep paying attention to what's happening in the spine, the angle of the sacrum, and then the ease with which the natural curves rise up here. And then choose the cross-legged position that results in the greatest sense of grounding with the capacity to expand upward and that sense of stability at your center where you feel like, yeah, I can sit here for a while and be comfortable. And if you have found that spot, then you've arrived. If you haven't found that spot yet, you need to keep playing with your toys, right? And come to this with that beginner's mind that allows you to explore new things so that you're not moving into a seat out of habit and the seat feels good because it feels habitual, but come into the seat with discernment so that the seat feels good because you've developed a sustainable shape. So sitting to me is the basis of so much of what we do in our yoga practices for asana, but for pranayama, for pratyahara, for concentration practices, for meditation practices. And so finding that healthful alignment is so important. And then from here, we'll move a little bit and play with rotation in this seat. To add a little bit of twisting action to the spine using our breath. Oh, and one more thing about this seat, as if I hadn't belabored it enough yet. So we are in external rotation and abduction. And remember, we actually want to distribute our weight onto not just the sits bones, but also the top parts of the femurs. And the way we did this in hero's pose, we're doing the same thing here. So we're in external rotation, but we're going to internally rotate the thigh a little bit. So yeah, exactly. I saw that movement, Ashlyn. That was perfect. So lifting the outside of the thigh and drawing down on the inside, and then do the same on the other side and reassess your seat. To me, this is the most grounding action that you can use in a cross-legged seat to find a stable base. And it just redistributes the weight into the entire triangle of the seat as opposed to just resting on those two little spots that are your sits bones. And so I invite you to really come to this with an openness of heart and mind and to play with all of these different ideas. And then we can begin with some rotation. And so I'll start with that reminder that the bottom part of the spine likes to be stable. The top part of the spine, especially the neck, they like to be mobile, right? They're built for rotation, for all kinds of movement. Your lumbar spine isn't built for a lot of rotation, and your sacroiliac joint is really supposed to be stable. It's not rotating. So as we're playing with some twists and breaths here, I want to just remind you that in rotations, the opposite side of the pelvis that you're rotating away from, so the side that you're rotating away from needs to be mobile. It needs to be allowed to shift. And so notice which leg is in front for you naturally in this cross-legged seat. And you will rotate into the opposite direction. So if your right leg is in front, you will rotate to the left, okay? So I invite you here to come from a lifted position with an inhalation. So the start of the sun breath allows us to reach up. Maybe there's a gap. We're going to take a couple rounds of breath here before we rotate, so I can chatter for a moment. Notice if there is a gap in the breath and rest in that gap. With your next exhalation, rotate to the opposite side as the front leg. So if it's, yeah, you know what I mean. And let the hands land, but not to drag yourself deeper into the rotation, but just to create a sense of grounding for the hands. And flow here, inhaling up, exhaling, rotating. Yeah, we're going to come to the same side over and over. Well, not over and over, but 3 or 4 times. And then you can hold for a while. Let yourself lengthen with the inhalation. Enjoy the gap. Maybe use the gap to realign the head above the spine, doing that gentle chin tuck and draw back. And the exhalation invites you to rotate, which means the opposite side of your bum, your pelvis, has to move a little bit. It will lighten the load that it carries, and more load will come onto the side that you're turning toward. That's natural. The next time you rotate, you can choose to hold there for a while. The hands land, but they're not going to yank you into the rotation. Instead, what you could do is to use the forward hand on the knee that's tucked, on the leg that's tucked inside, closer to the groin. You can create some isometric action here, not action that pulls you into the rotation, but just action that fires up those same muscles. So the hand is drawing to the midline, and the leg is drawing into abduction to create that isometric. Your nose might be most auspiciously aligned with the knee to keep you from striving for more rotation than you actually want to create here. And breathe and notice what's happening to the breath. Notice the places where, especially if you're creating the isometric action and that outward arm is compressing that side of the lungs, notice how the breath is redistributing itself in your body. Notice how you're sensing the movement of the diaphragm in this particular seat. You may be more aware here of the rhythm between the diaphragm and the pelvic floor, because you might be closer to the ground than in hero's pose. And so you might notice that with the inhalation, there's a slight release in any sort of holding or gripping, which we don't really want anyway, but there's a release in any contraction in the abdomen and in the pelvic floor. And with the exhalation, as the diaphragm moves toward the lungs, the pelvic floor rises up and the abs may draw in ever so subtly. If the isometric hold is too long and you want to just relax into this very gentle rotation, you can let go. And you might notice if there's any additional active range of motion just from having held that isometric for a bit. Sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. It doesn't really matter. It's just an exploration. Finish the round of breath that you're on. And then take one more round. And then with your inhalation, let the arms rise up first and then derotate and face to the front. Maybe the arms stay lifted, maybe they lower. Just notice what comes to you intuitively here. And then just for a moment, rotate to the other side. Not yanking, just active range of motion. If you don't trust yourself, just don't touch the hands down. Take a breath. And then with your next inhalation, rise up, derotate, and then switch the cross of the legs before we do the other side. So, second side, different story. So whatever props you assembled for the first side, they may not work exactly as you use them on the first side. So reassemble as necessary. Be curious. So don't feel rushed. We have lots of time. We'll create the time that's necessary, right, to really find your grounding. I kind of like to press myself up onto my fingertips when I switch sides and just wiggle a little bit. That may be completely like an idiosyncrasy I have, but I feel like it resets any sort of tension or gripping that I'm bringing with me from the other side, and then I press then I release myself back down. That may work or not work, but I invite it as an exploration. And then just notice maybe on this side you need fewer props or more props, and you might not know until you begin to move. So just be willing to stop and reassemble. And even your rotation, right, might be different now. There may be more range of motion or less range of motion. So come to the second side without any expectation. A new beginner's mind. You can continue to settle in, or you can begin to move. So we'll take a few breaths in and out of the rotation, like 4 or 5, before we hold. So I invite you to do that with the inhalation, lifting you up, bringing length into the spine, stability, extension, grounding. And with an exhalation, rotate naturally, touching the hands down, but not using them to create more range of motion. And moving for a few breaths in and out. Letting the opposite side of the pelvis move into the turn, lightening the load on that sits bone, on that femur, and bringing more of the weight into the side that you're turning toward. And then whenever it feels like the moment for you, you can move into quietude here, rotating away from the front leg. So if the front leg is left, rotating to the right, and then being here, either in your active range of motion or creating that isometric action of drawing the leg drawing the leg out into abduction at the same time that you're pulling back. Creating this isometric engagement between hand and leg to create a very active seat here. And breathe and notice how the breath is shifting around in your body. Location of breath may really be different now. If the isometric hold is too much or too long, you can always release that tension between the leg and the hand. Just resting both hands, nose perhaps in line with the knee to reduce that mental striving for more rotation. Finish the round of breath you're on and then take one or two more, coming out of the rotation whenever it feels most appropriate for you. Coming out by inhaling and lifting the arms first, creating length in the spine, and then rotating forward, maybe holding here for a moment, breathing or releasing the arms down. You notice what is appropriate for you. And then notice if you need to shift in your seat in any way as you settle in, to pay attention to your breathing for a moment. And as you become familiar with how the breath is unfolding now, you might also tune into your physicality and notice if anything shifted in your seat and your experience of your seat. And I don't mean your bum, I mean the posture, the shape. Is there a sense of grounding and connecting to the earth? Is there a sense of expansiveness upward? And do you feel stable, restful? If you're very happy here, you can stay here. If you would like to move on, you could lean back, bring your hands behind you. I'll show this from the side. Stretch the legs out in front of you and tap. I don't know really what to call this, but it's basically like the heels stay on the ground and you're lifting and lowering alternatingly your knees. Yeah, exactly. I see great examples of that on the screen. And then whenever you feel ready to stop that, you can stop that. So experiment with what else maybe your body wants to do here. Maybe flexing and extending the knee one at a time, just to sort of reduce any strain or gripping that may have crept into the knee joints or the hip joints during that cross-legged seat. Cross-legged seats are sort of the staple shape for seats in many yoga classes, but they're pretty tough for people. And so it's nice to release any stress that was created physically. And there are lots of ways to do that. You can also bring the feet to the ground and then move the knees out and in, or you can create, in the spirit of our twisting, our rotation, bring some windshield wiper action here. And you wouldn't know it from the way my sweater is hanging off my back body, but encouraging you to be in a natural spine here. So there's a slight lordosis in the lumbar. As the legs move side to side, of course, when the legs move to the left, what does your right hip do? It pops up, exactly. And vice versa, when the legs move to the right, the left side pops up. So the whole pelvis moves in the direction of the twist, bringing the entirety of the sacrum and the two ilia along so that we're not corkscrewing our poor sacrum inside the ilia. And that may create a very nice, joyful release here of that cross-legged seat. And then whenever you feel ready to stop, then just shake out the legs, let it wiggle, and have fun with that. And from here, I invite you now to swing both feet to one side and to come forward into a tabletop for a moment. We're not going to be here long. We're using our tabletop really just to bring a little bit of motion into the spine before we come into a child's pose to do some breathing there. And so from tabletop, I invite you to bring the bum toward the feet just a little tiny bit, like toward a child's pose, but not into a child's pose. We're not headed there yet. And with your inhalation, let yourself come forward. Maybe the elbows descend and almost touch all the way to the ground, coming into sort of a seal shape. So a tiny bit of a spinal extension. And then exhale and draw the hips back toward the feet. Maybe the head lands between the arms. So if the arms were to press together, they would press into the outer part of your ear. Inhale. Move forward and slightly up, pressing the hands into the earth. Exhale. Descend. And do that maybe 2 or 3 more times with your breathing, holding during the gap. Maybe by now the gaps between inhale and exhale and inhale have changed. Maybe for some of you they're shorter because there's more movement and there's more urgency for air. Maybe for some of you the gaps are actually longer and there is a lingering in the shape during the gap. But the movement is really the essence here, and that happens during the movement of the breath. Stillness of body during stillness of breath. Movement of body during active movement of breath. And so the speed of your movement, once again, reflects or is guided by the speed, I may have said that wrong. The speed of the movement of your body is guided by the movement of your breath. And you might just notice if the mind wants to get into the mix and wants something faster or something slower, and discern whether that's your wise mind speaking to you or your habitual samskaric mind, and then adjust accordingly. And take that flow one more time, and then of course you can keep going if you prefer. But if you're game, come all the way back and sit in our next seat, which is Rock's pose. Unlike Hero's pose, where the feet come out to the side and you're creating this sort of outward, almost like a W shape in your legs, in Rock's pose, you are your feet are together and you are sitting on your heels. You may want the same props. If you have an ankle that can't go flat on the ground, your washcloths are your best friends again, right? You can bring those under the ankles and create that curve for the ankle so that the feet can bear your weight. They can't do that if you're forcing them flat when they really don't have that range of motion. So be deliberate and open to the idea of bringing something under the ankles here. If it's too much weight on your feet, I know this sounds kind of weird, but you can shift the load around by bringing a blanket between the lower legs and the upper legs, the thighs. For a lot of people, they can be in rocks pose as long as they have something in between. And this is true for child's pose too. So that's all prep for child's pose as well. So here you might pull that blanket again into the very back of the knee, and then try to hold it there as much as you can as you sit back. And you may realize that this creates a very different weight distribution of your body on your lower legs, and it may be a whole lot more sustainable for you or the people you work with. If this is still somewhat uncomfortable, sometimes you may need just a little bit more lift. And so maybe that hand towel at the very final lip of your blanket can make all the difference in the world. And for some people, they may use 2 blankets, or they take a block and place the block either on top of the blanket, or if I had cued this better, if the blanket opening is toward the back, then you can stick it between the blanket and you have a softer landing spot on top of the block. And you can see how this has shifted the positioning of the spine. And you will feel where you have that sort of maximum sense of grounding, and then expansiveness upward and stability at your center. And so this is not just an exercise, right? This is not, we're playful, but we're not just playing, we're really creating a sustainable seat. And so this rocks pose is wonderful because if you look at your femurs in your hip sockets, they're in a nice natural position. You can still take your hands here and create a little bit of that internal rotation to bring more of the weight into the femurs. And you might actually feel that shift all the way into the sits bones as you're redistributing weight yet again. For those of you who aren't happy with all this propping and you have your feet, your hips directly on your feet, one thing that can be really, really nice here is to actually bring the heels just ahead of the sits bones, or the sits bones just behind the heels, and you'll feel the femur grounding onto the calves. But that really only works if you can maintain that happy angle in the sacrum, and you don't need any props in between. For some people, if they have really sensitive knees, and maybe I should have started with this, but oh well, better late than never, the whole kneeling position can be on a blanket and the feet can drape off the blanket. That can be really nice as well. So there are all kinds of options for rock pose too, to make this a more comfortable shape. So wherever you are, stay there for a moment and come back to your breathing rhythm in case it became a bit disjointed from all the moving of props. And return yourself to attention to the 4 parts of the breath, honoring the inhalations, the perhaps gentle retention at the top of the breath, the exhalation, the gentle suspension at the bottom of the breath. Invite your body to settle. Invite your vitality to ground. Invite your mind to be peaceful and equanimous. Finding your 4-part breath here. And if you would like, you could even sound your bumblebee breath for a couple or 3 rounds of breath. That vibration creates nitric oxide in your nose, your nasal cavities, which invites an opening of the bronchi and the blood vessels. And so bumblebee breath actually is a very powerful breath in enhancing a sense of calm in your nervous system, because your respiration becomes more efficient. The absorption of oxygen into tissues becomes more efficient. And so bumblebee breathing is a wonderful breath. Anytime you need an extra sense of calming or vitalizing. If you're actually really tamasic or dorsal, sometimes a bumblebee breath can be very much vitalizing and life affirming. So I encourage you to play with bumblebee in this position. And you can continue to do that, or from here, we're coming into a more extreme forward fold. We're already in a forward fold in our hips because we're at 90 degrees now in the hips. I invite you now to begin to lean forward, but maintaining the natural curves of the spine. So not just rounding forward like this, but leaning forward, creating that movement of the pelvis rolling around the heads of the femurs. The acetabulum is rolling around the heads of the femurs. And notice when you start losing that angle of your sacrum, you could bring your hands to your low back, really to the SI joint. And as you lean forward, the head stays lifted, so the head's not lowering down yet. Head is lifted. In fact, you can do that tuck and draw back position. And just notice when you begin to feel that now to move forward anymore, you have to move into some spinal flexion. You have a lot of support here from your own legs. And so coming into spinal flexion here is perfectly fine. But I want you to be really aware of it. And I don't want you to do things very often. But here, I'm really asking you to be aware of what's happening with the angle of your sacrum. And you can just experiment a few times. If you have a hard time with sensing this, then come back to me later after we debrief the practice, and we'll do this at the wall so you can really feel what I'm talking about here. So for those of you who would like to, you can begin to round the spine over the legs. You can keep your hands on your back just to feel what's happening back here. And you'll notice that the pelvis at some point just stops moving altogether. And what's happening now is flexion in the spine as your head may move toward the earth. Depending on your own anatomy, you might want a block under your forehead, or maybe that little towel is enough to catch the forehead. Or you can interlace your fingers with the fingers facing the palms to make a little cushion out of your own hands for your forehead. As you curl yourself down, I keep popping up, you guys, only because I want to make sure you can hear me. You don't have to keep popping up. You can just have your head down toward the earth and resting on something. If it can rest on the earth, let it rest on the earth, but also be willing to find whatever props are helpful for that forehead to land. Bringing the weight now probably slightly off the heels and onto the thighs as your back rounds and your head rests. And then continue to breathe here with the head resting on the earth, on a prop, on your hands. The upper body resting on your legs. If there's a big gap between your bum and your feet, it might be really lovely to grab a bolster or a blanket and to bring that between the legs, just like I showed in Rock's pose, and to actually have some support here for the body by this prop. You can layer those supports further by having the bolster and then a blanket, just having enough support between the legs and the upper legs and the lower legs, the thighs and the calves, so that you can feel supported front and back as you dive forward or stay forward to breathe here and notice how you're breathing now into your back body. I invite you to imagine that there's a loving person in your room and you've given them permission to place their hands on the very bottom, just sort of maybe fingertips at the scapulae, but on your rib basket, the bottom back part of your rib basket. And it's your compassionate action to breathe into the back of the rib basket, to lift and lower that loved person's hands with the action of your breath. And so you're down on the earth. I'm only sitting up because I want to project, but you're on the earth. Hands, imaginary hands on the rib basket. Giving yourself a support under the head. If the head is floating, giving yourself, and I wouldn't put my own hands on the back, that's a bit too much strain. So let your own arms rest and just have imaginary hands on your back. Supports between the thighs and the calves if there is a gap. A support under the head. Breathing into the back body. One more round of breath after you finish the round that you're on now. And then of course you're welcome to stay here for a while if you would like. But if you're ready to come up, place the hands under the shoulders, ground them into the earth. And then with an inhalation, press the earth away from you through the hands and let that encourage the spine to rise up back to rocks pose where you started, maybe readjusting props depending on what you need here versus what you needed in child's pose. And watching with your inner eye how the breath is unfolding now. You can stay here, or I'm inviting you to move on if you would like. Place the hands next to you on the earth. Come forward with your seat. Curl your toes under. And just for a moment, sit on your feet with toes curled under, taking your hands to fold all the toes under. Sometimes the little toes kind of splay out to the side where I promise we will not be here long. But you're going to toe sit for just a moment. You're basically in rocks pose, except now you are bending the ankles and the toes. And you're placing load on your feet in that way. If you can hang in there for 1 or 2 more breaths, feel free to do that. Otherwise, you can flatten the feet to the ground, or you can move to our next shape, where I invite you to place your hands to the earth if you would like, to press the knees off the ground so that now you're on your tippy toes. In sort of a squat here. So just the feet are on the ground, really just the toes are on the ground. Your fingertips can be on the ground to give yourself some balance, or you can press the hands into the to the outside of the thighs as you're pressing the thighs into the hands to create some isometric abduction in the legs here. You may be doing some shaking, that's totally okay. And then whenever you feel ready, if your anatomy allows, I'm gonna pop myself around like this to show this from the front. You can bring the feet to the ground so that the heels are grounding, and then walk yourself outward into a bit of a squat, using your arms kind of as a counterbalance for the weight of your bum. And if your heels float in a squat, they can absolutely float. We're not going to be here terribly long. You'll, if you would like, place your hands on the ground ahead of you. Bring your weight forward a bit. You'll probably have to rise onto your tippy toes in your squat and lift yourself up. I'm going to show this again from the side. So you're starting with, in your squat, the hands come out in front of you. Maybe the legs squeeze into the arms squeeze into the legs. You could come into, oh my God, I'm losing my words. You could come into crow pose here if you were so inclined, but I'm not asking you to do that. Instead, I'm asking you to begin to move toward straightening the legs. They may not straighten all the way, so you may be here. And then lift the hands away from the floor once you feel that's possible in terms of shifting, and come into a half lift. You could have your blocks for this half lift, or you can use your legs for this half lift. And notice that you're yet again in the same hip position that you've been in for quite a while now in this half lift. From here, I invite you to bring your hands to the SI joint yet again, to notice if you feel as though you might have that natural angle in your sacrum and a natural spine here. You're using your core power now to hold yourself up. The hands aren't supporting you. Maybe notice how on the inhalation, the movement of the diaphragm downward collaborates with your other back and abdominal muscles, stabilizer muscles, to hold you steady. And on the exhalation, when the diaphragm relaxes toward the lungs, you might feel that the abdominal muscles kick in a little bit more, and that the pelvic floor rises. With your next inhalation, you can rise all the way to standing, and then just jog it out for a little bit. Releasing, playing, whatever sort of feels good for you. And then stand with your legs wide, your blocks ahead of you. Maybe the hands are at the hips. And then come to a half lift from here. And as you do this, notice how your pelvis is rolling over the heads of the femurs. So you're rolling the acetabulum over the heads of the femurs. You are not rounding the spine. So you're staying in this natural spinal position as you move down to come into this half lift. Once you are in the half lift, explore a little bit, and you're welcome to have the hands on blocks if you would like, but you don't need to if you don't want to. Explore a little bit about the effect of internally versus externally rotating the femurs in this position. So for some of you, internal rotation will greatly facilitate a forward fold. It supports that movement of the acetabulum over the head of the femur, and it creates more ease in a forward fold. If you are that person and you feel, oh yeah, that's much easier than it was before, then internal rotation is a great thing for you in the legs in a forward fold. If, on the other hand, internal rotation here makes things no different or too easy, you are likely already hypermobile. And then what I ask you to do is to externally rotate the legs as you come down to create more engagement, more strength. So if you already know that you're kind of a hypermobile person, you don't want to add more internal rotation. You want to externally rotate. You may not be able to come forward as far, but you're going to protect your joints more. So only you can know what's the most appropriate thing for you. And so you may want to try it both ways. And then if you're not sure, find the middle way. So the goal is not a huge range of motion, right? The goal is to find a healthful alignment in the joint. And then whether you're internally or externally rotating, depending on your own anatomy, if you would like to move further into that forward fold, you can. And at some point here, it's perfectly fine to move into some flexion in the spine. It's the transition where you really need to be mindful of that natural alignment. And from here, I just invite you to maybe experiment with different widths of your stance. So you could heel toe your feet out. And if you're if you're happier with internal rotation here, you could bring the heels out farther than the toes. If you need to get a little more stability, maybe the heels and the toes are in line with one another. Or if you really want to externally rotate a lot, maybe the toes point out. Just sort of notice what feels good for you. Hands can either be on a block or on the ground. Give yourself the pleasure of a block if there's any strain in the hamstrings or in the low back. And then ready yourself yet again for rotation. So we will start with the left hand under the nose on the ground or on a block, wherever your shape feels most auspicious for you. And then take the right arm, bring it out to the side so that it's horizontal to your floor. From here, draw the right arm into the hip socket, into the shoulder socket. I really want to see you draw your right arm into your hip socket. That would be really funny. But, try the shoulder socket instead, and then press into the left hand. So listen to that. That was probably unexpected. I'm not asking you to move the right hand. I'm asking you to press the left hand into the ground, into the block, wherever you are, and to initiate the movement of the rotation to the right side to come. And so do this a few times. Press into the left hand and let that open up the right side. In fact, you could take the right hand and put it on your sacrum. That is sort of a prompt for you to move the entire pelvis. But the movement is coming from the left hand. That is allowing the rotation to happen in the thoracic spine. And then if you would like, from here, you could also turn the neck and look toward the ceiling. So often we let ourselves be guided into this rotation by swinging the right arm up. But here we're actually using not momentum, but muscle power to rotate. And whenever you've had enough of this, wait for an exhalation to return to center. If you're happy with this long of a half inversion, you can stay here. If you would like to rise up for a moment, you can rise up. Wherever you decided to end up, whether standing or inverted, find your 4-part breathing. Notice the inhalation, the retention, the exhalation, and the suspension. If you are standing, this might be a nice time to come forward again to find your way to hands on a block or on the ground. On weight, the left hand, bring more of the load into the right hand. Bring the left hand out to the side, horizontal to the earth. Draw the arm bone into the shoulder socket and then place the hand on the sacrum. And whenever you are ready, with an inhalation, press the right hand into the earth and let that invite the rotation to the left. Maybe the head, the neck turns so that you're looking at the ceiling. And you'll notice naturally your pelvis as a unit turned. The right hip is lower than, or the right half of the pelvis is closer to the earth than the left side of the pelvis. The whole unit has turned as one. You might even bring a slight bend into that right knee, and notice if that feels better for your low back. You can stay here a moment longer, or you can use an exhalation to return to center. Yogi's choice. If you're still in rotation, wait for your next exhalation and then let the exhalation bring you back forward, both hands to the earth. And then yogi's choice on how to rise up. You can let the arms dangle beneath you so that you're engaging the core stabilizers, and then reverse swan dive up. Or you can let the arms dangle, engage those stabilizers, and then bring both hands to the two sides of the sacrum and the ilium, and rise up from here with a natural spine guiding you up slowly. And when you have arrived in a standing position, maybe heel toe your way in, bring the hands to the heart, and tune into your breathing. Once you feel as though you've recovered your natural breath and all 4 parts of the breath, I invite you to turn to the short end of your mat if you're not already there. I'm going to show my hand placement for this next move, and I promise we're almost done, so hang in there. We're getting there. I'm going to show you the hand placement that I'm going to recommend for a couple of half sun salutes for you. So in this hand placement, your little fingers are just sort of wrapping around the top of the anterior superior iliac spine, so the top of the hip bone, and the thumbs are on the low rib basket. And your fingers are in a pretty natural spacing here. And as we dive forward into our forward fold here with the legs not apart but together, your goal is not to change the distance between your fingers. So I'm just going to show what could happen, and what you may not want to have happen. I mean, it's in the end your decision, right? But if you move into a forward fold from here, and you move into hyperlordosis in the low spine, if you're actually creating a lot of extension in the back as you swan dive forward, what will happen to your fingers is they'll spread apart, right? Or on the other hand, if you're flexing too much in the spine, as opposed to moving into the fold from a natural curve in the spine, the fingers will get crunched together because the low ribs and the upper hips are going to move too close together. So if you're too far in extension, the low ribs kind of pop out and the hands spread apart. If you're moving into too much flexion, you're going to feel that crunching in your hands. And so the hands are really just a biofeedback mechanism for you to maybe sense into what might be happening in your spine as you're folding into a half lift from Tadasana. So I invite you to mountain pose and to place your fingers in that alignment. And then from here, you will roll the pelvis, the acetabulum, the hip socket, over the heads of the femurs as you move forward into or toward your half lift. And just notice if you can keep the spacing of the fingers, and you might notice that then you are actually moving into this half lift with a natural curve in the spine. If that's not happening for you, try bending the knees quite a bit, because it may be your hamstrings that are tugging on your pelvis. And so you just take a little bit of strain out of the hamstring by bending the knees. And so only you can know what's appropriate for you here. If you're not sure, probably you need to bend the knees a little bit. And if that's the case, then even once you release the hands to be in your half lift with the arms just dangling so that you're using core stabilizers to hold you here, you may need to stay in a slightly bent knee position to maintain a natural spine here. From here, it's up to you whether you would like to move into a forward fold. You could have your hands on your sacrum to feel whether the pelvis is still moving, or if the pelvis has stopped moving and all of the bending now comes from flexion in the spine. That flexion in the spine from this point is perfectly fine if you have a healthy spine. If you know that you have like a protruding disc or something, this may not be a happy space for you. Forward folds are kind of compressing the forward parts of your discs here. And if there is a vulnerability there, you might sense it. But if you're happy in spinal flexion, you can release the head, you can release the arms, and you can rest here for a moment, maybe even in ragdoll. If that's not a happy place for you, I would suggest that you maybe take blocks and stay in the half lift, stay in the natural spine, and rest with the head lifted. Maybe you bring a little bit of external rotation into the low legs to increase the lift in your arches, to engage the spine, maybe even drawing the kneecaps toward the hips to fire up all of the muscles around the knees. And breathe and notice your four-part breathing in this half inversion, this deep forward fold. You have the same exploration here that you did in the wide-legged forward fold, where you can play with sensing into what shifts for you, what is better for you in terms of internal or external rotation of the femur in the hip socket, whether you want more strength here, meaning external rotation firing up the glutes, or whether you want more release here with internal rotation, something you won't do if you know that you're hypermobile. Finish the round of breath that you're on. And then take 1 or 2 or 3 more, yogi's choice. But know that whenever you are ready, you can choose with an inhalation to rise all the way back up to mountain, either with the arms in a reverse swan dive or hands on the sacrum. Inhaling to lift, using that natural spinal alignment to bring yourself upright. And whenever you have arrived in your upright shape, perhaps bringing the hands to the heart, mountain pose. Reconnecting to your breathing. I'm going to come to my knees just so that I can not be a headless person. And notice your physicality, your vitality, your mind state, your emotions, your sense of connection. And I invite you to come to the ground in whatever way feels most auspicious for you. Perhaps finding a seat. Or perhaps finding a supine position for a brief shavasana, either in a seated form or in a lying down form, yogi's choice. Taking the time to find appropriate props. Taking the time to notice with compassion what your body would like right now. A seat, a supine position, a reclined shape. And then letting yourself settle into whichever shape you have chosen. Surrendering the weight of the body to the earth. Surrendering the flow of breath to the movement of life force, of prana, that pulses through all of us. Surrendering your thoughts and emotions to your deeper inner wisdom. Letting go of witnessing, releasing any effort, any wanting, any desire. As you surrender to this moment and to this space for 2 minutes of silence until my voice brings you back. Gently invite your senses to reawaken to inner and outer stimuli. Noticing from inside out whether you need any little stretches or wiggles. Perhaps choosing to give full attention to the next round of breath. Receiving the inhalation with gratitude as you draw breath in. Releasing the exhalation with appreciation as you release a breath out. If you're lying down, this might be a good time to begin to plot your journey to a seat. And then take all the time you need in the next 10 to 15 seconds to bring yourself upright so that we can meet in a seat to close our practice. And whenever you have arrived in a seat, notice if it feels auspicious to place your hands at your heart center. And tune in, yet again, to your 4-part breath. Meeting at this time with deep appreciation and gratitude. Tune in one more time to your physicality, your sense of grounding, expansiveness, and stability. And meet your body with a sense of gratitude and appreciation. And one more time, tune into your mind state and your emotional presence. Meeting whatever thoughts and emotions are present with an open heart, with compassion, with appreciation. Take a moment to reflect on the practice and see if there's a takeaway, something meaningful that you want to absorb into your tissues, into your vitality, into your memory banks. Maybe there's a link of this takeaway, if there was one, with your intention. That transforms the intention into a dedication of merit. And if a dedication does emerge for you, I invite you to draw it into your own heart space with your next breath in. And then to share it outward with your community with your next breath out. And thank you so much for your patience in this practice. It's a joy and an honor to spend this